Really just wanting to thank and greet all of you for joining us and being part of this virtual event of the African Federation. The idea of Pan Africanism is long overdue. It's not something new. We're not really coming at this with a novel approach. What has not yet been successful is really how we are going to achieve this notion of Pan-Africanism and how we are going to move our continent forward. So today's event is really focused on the solution and finding a way forward for the continent, which aims to redeem our continent and reinstate the sovereignty for Africa's people. Today, we'll establish an understanding of why TAF is really needed, why TAF is needed by the continent. Again, my name is Elisabeth Valerio, and I serve as the CEO of the African Federation, and I will be hosting you for today's discussion. As we embark on this dialogue today, let's also be inspired by the vision of a continent where collaboration triumphs over division and where shared aspirations pave the way for shared success. I want to thank you once again for being here as part of today's session. Let the conversation begin and let us form bonds during today's session. And now I'm proud to introduce our very first speaker, and that is the CEO or Chief Executive Officer of the African Federation's Focus Unit on TAF Narrative. Benjamin, if I can turn the floor over to you.
Thank you everyone for being here today as we embark on a crucial discussion about why is TAF needed. My name is Musanjufu Benjamin. I am from Uganda, and I am leading the establishment of the TAF Narrative Focus Unit within the African Federation as the Focus Unit CEO. We will speak further about focus units later in today's session. Meanwhile, to set a stage on the current state of African unity, let's delve into the historical context of Pan-Africanism. As we reflect on our shared history, we find that these seeds of Pan-Africanism were sown in response to the challenges faced by the African continent. Leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, Marcus Garvey, and others envisioned a united Africa, standing together against the forces of colonization and oppression. Today, those ideals remain relevant. Now let's turn our attention to our present-day challenges. The African continent is diverse with rich cultures, language, and histories. Yet, we face countless hurdles such as economic disparities, political instability, and social challenges. These issues are interconnected, and addressing them requires our united effort. Our collective strength lies in recognizing that our destinies are intertwined. By working together, we can overcome these challenges and build a future where all African nations thrive. I am delighted today to introduce the CEO of the African Federation. Elisabeth will share more about why is TAF needed and why we need a new and distinct Pan-African organization. Elisabeth, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. Thank you for your remarks. And as I look at the participants in today's session, it's really exciting because I see many of you, you're leaders from across the continent who've been part of this journey and perhaps even part of other journeys. But here you are today looking for a solution and being part of shaping the solution for the future of Africa. I know that, we all want to see a future where Africa is benefiting our people, African people, as well as future generations. So building on what Benjamin has shared, let's delve into why a viable Pan-African organization is not just desirable, but really is imperative for the progress of our continent. The need for unity goes beyond the historical context. It's a response to the really pressing issues that we're all facing today. And the African Federation is established as a catalyst for change. We are working on addressing economic disparities, political instability, and we are fostering social development. That is really part of the vision and mission of the African Federation. We want to be able to hold African governments to account. And standing united, we will be able to amplify our African voices on the global stage, making it clear that Africa is not just a collection of nations, but is a superpower, a powerful force for positive change. Unity is really what we need in order to be able to move our vision forward. And it's not a surrender of sovereignty. When you talk of unity, rather, it's a strategic force that will strengthen the ability of all nations on the African continent to thrive. The time has come for us to move beyond individual pursuits and embrace the collective power of Pan Africanism. It's really time for us to act upon and respond to the call for unity, because, if you look across the continent, never before has this been so clear an appeal for a new future, a new direction for the African continent. So the African Federation as an organization really envisions a continent where education, healthcare, and other opportunities are not confined to the boundaries within our countries, which were brought upon us by, colonial powers. But we're here to pave the way for access to all of these much needed resources for every African person, regardless of their social economic status. So beyond economic considerations, Pan-Africans really embody the spirit of Ubuntu. It's not about which country you come from or, what you look like, what your name is. It really is about the understanding that my humanity is inextricably bound with yours. It speaks of a collective responsibility for the well-being of our fellow Africans. And so in times of joy, when we celebrate together, or in times of sorrow, when we console each other, we must remember Ubuntu. So you may be wondering right now, but why a new organization? Why not the organizations that already preceded the African Federation? What about the other Pan-African initiatives is not working? And indeed, some have made positive impacts on our continent, showcasing not only what is possible, but also underscoring the urgency of a renewed commitment to Pan-African collaboration. But let's look at some of the other organizations. If you start by looking at the African Union, for example, the AU has played a role in fostering unity and addressing common challenges. And through its initiatives like the New Partnership for African Development, or NEPAD, and the African Peer Review Mechanism, the AU has created frameworks for economic development, for good governance, and for mutual accountability. When we think of Pan-African organizations, another noteworthy example is the Continental Free Trade Area. This ambitious initiative, which was launched in 2018, aims to create a single market for goods and services across the continent. And so by removing barriers, the organization has the potential to boost intra-Africa trade, to stimulate economic growth, and to create opportunities for shared prosperity on the African continent. However, it's essential to acknowledge that not all Pan-African initiatives have been met with success. Some have faltered due to perhaps challenges such as lack of sustained political will or insufficient resources, and the failure to address the diverse needs of the member states that they represent. And so the lesson from these failures are actually quite invaluable to us as the African Federation. For instance, the lack of a coordinated response to crises, such as the recent health crises that we had across the globe, and the economic challenges, these were exposed as vulnerabilities within these Pan-African organizations. Past initiatives also struggled to navigate political differences and to effectively pool resources for the benefit of Africa's people. And so these experiences really emphasize the need for a more robust and adaptable framework. So why do we need a new Pan-African organization? Well, as an organization, the African Federation can learn from these past shortcomings. We have the ability through the establishment of the African Federation to leverage the time of renewal, the calls for renewal, more innovative and resilient and practical approaches to building Africa's future. And so we must learn from our history and not only address current challenges, but also harness our potential and equip ourselves to strengthen our future as a diverse and powerful continent. And so I think I've spent a little bit of time really highlighting the necessity for exploring the potential benefits of increased collaboration among African nations, and really looking at economically what potential there is for collaboration as a continent. And so I would want to ask, can you imagine the impact of a unified approach towards trade and investment and resource management? By pooling our resources and our expertise, we could create an environment where economic prosperity really becomes a shared reality for our continent. And as the African Federation, as an organization, we will be able to amplify Africa's influence on the global stage. And so together we can address these issues that impact us collectively, such as resource exploitation, climate change, peacekeeping efforts, healthcare on our continent, and our collective voice could become more influential, shaping the narrative of Africa and the role that we can play in this world. And on a social and cultural level, increased collaboration fosters a deeper understanding and appreciation of our diverse identities. Again, I'm going to emphasize that our diversity is our strength. It opens doors for cultural exchanges, for enriching our society and strengthening our bonds, the bonds that tie us together as one African family. The potential of the African Federation really is a strong Pan-African organization, a vast and multifaceted organization. And so TAF is not just an idea, it's a mechanism for delivering a brighter future and a more prosperous future for all Africans. Because we are really wanting to answer the question about why is TAF needed? Why is TAF needed? So let's talk a little bit about the challenges that we are facing, the issues and challenges that we are facing as the continent of Africa, as African people, whether we are living on the continent or abroad. We've been hard at work actually thinking about what does success look like for us as a continent, and as we look to the future, what is it that we want to be able to say we have achieved? And so that required us really looking long and hard at the challenges and the priority policies we needed to focus on. And so in fact, TAF's entire organization is now anchored, and some of you may have been with us during the pre-launch event. We defined the anchors that we are calling our focus units, and there are 5 core focus units, essentially separate areas within the African Federation. So they'll operate as coordinated focus units, but otherwise they are relatively autonomous, because each focus unit will have its own leadership. It will have its own responsibilities, and it will be responsible for its own objectives, its own activities, and the impact which are integrated and aligned with those of the global mission and vision of the African Federation. And so I'd like to talk just for a few moments about what those priority policies are, and I will touch on some of the issues that we've identified. But again, I want to emphasize that this session should really be as interactive as possible. So TAF focus units, which is those 5 core separate units, will really become the catalyst for change and the engines for unification of our continent. And the TAF focus units will promote dialogue. They will develop information and intelligence. They will really develop thought leadership, publishing opinions and policy options and guidelines. And they will also plan and advocate for change and implementable solutions. So the focus units have a massive role to play in executing our mission and vision as the African Federation. And each focus unit has its own identified list of priorities. And I'll share some of the highlights on that. I can't go through all of them because it is such an enormous, amount of information to share, but I will share with you some of the highlights. So for example, under TAF governance, that's one of the 5 focus units, which really focuses on our systems of control and accountability within and between governments, and the economy and civil society. And it includes and encompasses, for example, the law, with an emphasis on convergence and sovereignty for the delivery of effective leadership and peace on our continent. And when you look at the focus unit for TAF governance, and by the way, we do have what we call our overarching policies as well, and these would be really the universal issues that impact us all across the focus units. For example, when you think about getting rid of colonial borders within the continent, these are our overarching focuses and challenges that we want to address. The imposed narratives, for example, where the West is essentially setting the agenda for our continent, telling us how to think, telling us what to say, and really reporting for us. These are all things that really are considered overarching. Creating or establishing a common African language, that might be one aspect. So I'm not going to focus on the overarching or the underarching issues. What I'm going to touch on are the issues that we identified under the focus units. So in TAF governance, one of the examples was looking at the violation of human rights and the shrinking civic space across our continent, and how, as the African Federation, we can advocate for an open civic space that respects African values and allows Africans to live with dignity. And so, there's a lot of research that has to be done in terms of how to address this. We also had identified good governance and democracy, and perhaps looking at term limits across the continent from a political perspective, because we really want to promote good governance and not a particular version of democracy, but really looking at what is right for the African continent. So many countries right now have adopted a very Western style democracy. We have to analyze that and see, is that what's in the best interest of the African citizen, the citizens across our continent. We also were looking at issues like corruption, the absence of transparency and non-accountability across the continent. This is a very long list. For example, conflict across our continent. There's an immense amount of work to be done with regards to armed conflicts, the impact they're having on our citizens. Some of these conflicts have taken on an international dimension. How do we address this? How do we get to the root causes? How do we reverse the impact of this and even heal the outcomes of this? Looking at the reform of the African Union, which we spoke about earlier, we really are advocating for comprehensive reforms of the United Nations Security Council as well, in order for us to increase the permanent representation of Africa. So we've got a lot of work to do under TAF governance. And then another point was looking at the support of civil society organizations, and really ensuring that we address issues relating to, what is affecting civil society. So that is TAF governance. Again, I'm going to pause to see if there are issues that any of you, have identified under TAF governance that perhaps we've not addressed, or your reaction to, this notion of having a focus unit around governance. If you've got anything that you'd like to contribute, please do so.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you. It's my second time to have a global meeting, and I'm very happy to be here. Peter here, Uganda, head focus units. So from your presentation, it is very key to note that conflict, fragility, and peace building is still a very big challenge for African nations. We are the ones having a lot of conflicts, and we are failing to resolve them for thousands of years now. That we have recurring conflicts, even after civilization, we thought would be better. But it is still a very big problem we have, and peace building, bridging gap is a very big challenge. I think because of the different indigenous communities we have a variety of tribes and ethnicity that is not fully unified, having a common agenda and a common identity that we can still live. So TAF will also have a lot to deal with conflicts across various communities of operation. Thank you so much.
So glad to have you here from Uganda, and you certainly are right in the midst of helping us shape the solutions for this, right? Since you are working with the focus unit. So no, thank you for that contribution. I do see that Tadini has also raised his hand. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I think the focus unit is really touching on the key issues of the day, because the question of sovereignty is really up in the air when it comes to African nations, not only coming from how the West has been leading in describing the story of Africa or the path that Africa has to follow, but also with the East joining, and a lot of people beginning to complain that in each bargain that an African state engages with leading countries in the East, there's always a question of are we not giving up our freedoms, and are we not capable of doing these things ourselves without the assistance of these foreign nations? So I think that is a very key area, and you can see that it's across the continent. Everyone is struggling with the sovereignty and even the independence or the will of the African leaders that we have to save the people of Africa, as opposed to saving the interests of foreign bodies. And that would be a mammoth task. So it would be interesting how the Federation would be approaching that one. Not only does it create a lot of opposition, but it will require a lot of engagement across the nation, the continents. Interesting times ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Masaya. And most definitely, it will be challenging work to do in terms of trying to we're grappling with how do we move ourselves beyond this point. But as you said, very interesting times, because if the solutions are coming from us as Africans for the first time, there will be the potential for us to be able to resolve it. So thank you again, both of you, for the contributions. I will go ahead and move on. So as I mentioned, that is just one of 5 of our focus units. The next focus unit that I would like to highlight is called TAF Economy. And it really centers around our systems of production on the continent of Africa. Consumption is a very big focus, and it's really about for efficient public and private markets for goods and services. We really want to make sure we are thinking about the needs of our continent and the production and consumption. And then also we are going to emphasize technology or innovation and the integration and supply of money within our economy. So TAF Economy, again, is a very massive focus unit. If you can imagine us rolling out 5 separate focus units, I think the last focus unit on governance and then this one on economy are going to be some very large, we're going to have to do a lot of heavy lifting to get through these. But I'll highlight some of the priority policies that we have identified already. And again, this was through collective research initially. There were a number of polls that were done to help us prioritize what we will focus on in the initial stages of the African Federation. And when I say the initial stages, looking 10 to 20 years. So we are wanting to make sure that, we really have a long-term view in solving our problems on the continent. So under TAF Economy, we are looking at issues around the governance of our land across the continent as a solution for alleviating poverty. We want to ensure that we have food sovereignty and that we can really support industrial development using our own resources on the continent. And we've had so many conversations over the past year as we've been shaping the African Federation about how we have everything we could ever need as a continent. But special attention needs to be placed on post-colonial land governance, and the nuances involved in trying to really ensure that we put the African people at the center of land governance. We should be producing and growing our own food. We should have industry around agriculture, for example, or food processing or packaging. And so this all creates and contributes to the TAF economy, but it interplays, right, with the other focus units. So if you think of food sovereignty, it does have impact on governance as well, and so does land governance. We want to look also at the industrial development of our continent. Why are we not manufacturing our own technologies? Why are we not producing our own medicines, for example? Why are we not producing the machinery for our agricultural production? Why are we not innovating as a continent? Why do we look to the West or look East for our solutions when it comes to innovation? And so industrial development will be at the core of TAF economy. We also will focus on aspects of poverty alleviation, and that can include job creation, retaining our resources as a continent. We are being exploited extensively, and we need to make sure that we retain the wealth of our continent for our own people. So the poorest people in the world are on our continent, the majority of them, right? And so what do we need to reverse that? We cannot have 41% of Africans living on less than $1.90 per day. And yet we are so well endowed with resources as a continent. So really we support the notion of poverty alleviation and looking at how we will harness and protect the potential of Africa's resources, but also of our youth, for the future of our youth. We want to make sure that we also retain our youth on the continent as an asset. I mean, essentially, the young people are leaving, going to other countries, building other industries. Let's make sure we are providing opportunities for them right here. I have embarked on youth employment as one of the topics here. And that is, it goes without saying, we have the largest population of young people on our continent, and yet many of them are not employed. We have something like 420 million youth who are currently unemployed on our continent, and it's not for lack of ability or lack of talent. We also need to look at small enterprises and how we can formalize informal enterprises. And there are many implications there, right? So we need to make sure that we are examining the policy framework and creating an environment that is conducive for small enterprises, small and medium enterprises. Infrastructure is an important part of the economy for the continent of Africa. So looking at development of infrastructure, and I could go into a lot of detail there. Another aspect is intra-Africa trade. If you look at the African continent in comparison to Europe, for example, we only have 14.4% of total exports being intra-African trade, yet European trade is in close to 70%. Inter-Asian trade is around 60%. So why are we not working to expand intra-Africa trade as a continent? And then developing cooperation, partnerships, the types of agreements that will be put in place to make sure we forge Africa-focused development will be also one of the key factors. But the list is very long. I could talk about things like illicit financial flows, the importance of a centralized system or Pan-African payment system or a single currency for Africa. These are things we're going to examine and really develop a brain trust around and ensure that we have thought leadership about how to find a way forward for the continent of Africa. And there are examples, right, from other continents that we can look to, but we need to be doing this with an eye on Africa. And then the expansion of media will be another core key element of TAF economy. The potential for media on the continent is incredible in terms of job creation, and also taking control of, our own narrative. And we'll talk about TAF narrative in just a moment. So I'll pause and see if there are any thoughts or contributions you'd like to make with regards to TAF economy. And I did see that we did have a hand earlier. Thank you so much. Susan, I'll start with you. I know that I'm going out of order here. Susan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Elisabeth. Mine is a question. I need clarity. How do we as TAF intend to like boost the industrialization in Africa? How are we going to do that? Is there a roadmap? Is there something that is laid out that as an organization, this is how we're going to do this to make sure we achieve it in the continent? Thank you.
It's an excellent question. Thank you so much for that, Susan. And again, I'm not on this platform with all of the answers. These 5 focus units are in development. They are aimed at working through finding solutions for exactly what your question is. How are we going to establish, economic development or industrial development on our continent? But it starts really with capacitating African people, right? It starts with really removing all of the barriers that are stopping progress in terms of industrial development. We need to look at why is it that other nations are coming to our continent and thriving and exploiting the resources that we have, yet African people are not. We need to look at the talent that is pouring out of the borders. How are we going to retain talented people who are currently working in diaspora? How are we going to ensure that they come back home, perhaps, with the skills that they have to rebuild the continent? So there are a lot of issues, and it's all interconnected in so many ways across the focus units. But it starts with creating a collective effort towards progression, right? We also need to look at what do we need to do to capacitate the continent. In the future, I do envision, and I know many of the TAF executives have had conversations about even establishing our own industrial capacity through TAF economy. And so I can see a scenario where TAF economy is even driving the development of enterprises. We will support entrepreneurs across the continent. But in addition to that, we will partner with those who are progressively working towards establishing, enterprise on our continent, and those who are innovative in their thinking. But we are going to put African people at the core of all of this. We're going to emphasize the development of Africans. I hope I answered your question, Susan. I will open up and see if there are any other execs that want to add to the response.
Yeah, that's Maui here. Maybe I think one of the things is, in addition to creating the space for the discourse to take place and also trying to advocate for or set the agendas, we will also be taking actions in a very organized way. So basically, we will show others the way in terms of how to do it on the ground as well. It might be, setting up a venture that kind of showcases that specific interest that the focus units will develop. So it's kind of taking action as well on the ground in a way that relates and resonates with individual citizens as well as other stakeholders that want to see how a particular agenda is pushed forward in an active way as well.
Thank you very much for that response and for adding to the response. By the way, if I can also just introduce Susan, is regional head for Central Chapters of Eastern Africa. So I know you've got a huge undertaking and you've been doing an amazing job, as part of the African Federation. And then Doug Maui, who also provided some contributions a moment ago, is the Chief Operating Officer within the Office of the CEO at the executive level of the African Federation. So we have an amazing team, and I'm so happy to see all of you. Thank you. I saw another hand, and I do want to give you an opportunity because you raised your hand first.
Thank you so much, Elisabeth. My name is Expedito Kule. I'm from Uganda. You'll bear with me. I'm on Fanzi. To start with, I want to talk about the issue of the African Continental Free Trade Area that you started with. It has become a song, but I see no implementation, no action taking place, because even some presidents, African presidents, they go for a summit, they sit and agree upon what to do, but as they reach their countries, things change. They agree upon tariffs here and there, but the moment they leave the summit, as they reach back to their countries, things fail to happen the way they have accepted them to go. And now, this staff has come with a solution. Let us act and ensure that we reach this goal, ensuring that all goes well.
Thank you very much for that very important contribution. I don't think there's much else that I can add except to say that on one aspect of the work we want to do as the African Federation as well is to really hold our governments to account. But in addition to that, as we look at, and you touched on a really important point regarding the intra-Africa, trade, we also want to make sure that we are looking at developing our own mechanisms for, expanding regional value chains and ensuring that we actually spawn the development of intra-African trade. So we will not only be addressing the issues and what is not being done, but we will be coming with solutions, and hopefully that will add a little bit more, progress to what we would expect to see on our continent. So thank you very much again for that contribution. Peter, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Talking about industrialization, actually, it is a driving force for development. Europe actually came and grabbed a lot of African potential, and they realized that they need to do a lot of industrialization in Europe to have them grow and develop to the level where they are now. Actually, that's the level now that is actually taking our people as immigrants, and because they used it. So if we actualize industrialization and we develop it fully, it will answer a lot of problems, including food, sovereignty, poverty alleviation, youth unemployment. You find that it is actually one of the biggest drivers of economy if we focus more and develop it. So that's what we actually also need to dive in more, because it is one of the biggest answers to almost all areas of economy. Land governance, I see land governance has actually affected a lot of nations in Africa, where I see very many countries are being affected. South Africa, Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, they are facing a lot. In Uganda, also the World Bank recommends land to be taken away from native Ugandans in central Uganda. So you can see the conflicts we are going to have with government. And when land actually moves from an individual, that means that person is deprived of production using the land. So there's a lot of advocacy and engagement. We need TAF has to be in to make sure we'll have access to land, which is the first capital to individuals, especially these ones who are the common people. But of course, we know also that land is not being utilized in Africa the way it is supposed to be. So we left land to the zoos, we left land for the grasshoppers. And if you go even up country, the Uganda now, you find that people are very poor and there's a lot of land. So maybe if TAF could also, we will also have to come and say, can we utilize land to make sure it is not idle to bring this appetite of being removed from your hands and being controlled by government. So that also needs to be discussed further. But anyway, actually, economy is one of the biggest, it is one of the pots that if we resurrect it, the rest will really fall into place. Thank you so much.
So you've raised a lot of points, but essentially that's been one of the debates, right? At the executive level, we are trying to figure out which focus unit is going to be, really the priority and what is ready to launch, essentially. Because when you look at the economy focus unit, it really is a massive undertaking, but it's so vital and so important. But others would say that every single one of these focus units, to some extent, have an importance. I love how you really wove in the vital elements of industrial development and what TAF economy could do, even to in terms of interplay with other focus units. So thank you for that. I see another hand. Patrick, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks. I just wanted to say something very little. I don't want to derail the meeting. But there's something the last speaker said about land and the empty land or idle land. I just want us to be careful that we don't nurture that World Bank narrative that speaks about African land as idle and empty, and therefore then pushes the incentive to come and grab it. I think TAF has to be very, very careful to say that our grasshoppers have a right to land, they can live there. Our flora and fauna has a right to exist. And we also have to respond to the dictates of nature. so that we don't occupy and utilize every inch the way someone would wish us to do. And so I think it's important to balance, between the needs of nature and people, but also with the intergenerational equity in mind, because we can't use all these things now. I think we still have generations to come, and Africa is the only place that has these spaces. And I want us to enjoy space. So it would be nice to be careful that we don't fall into that dangerous narrative. I just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And as an environmentalist, I'm literally sitting at the edge of a national park with elephants not even 100 meters away, and lions and wildlife, and biodiversity has become a major issue, right? So we do have to find that balance. And that's why, again, as I mentioned, each of the focus units has its very important role to play, because as we are leveraging and harnessing the potential of our land, there is a lot that we need to think about in terms of the long-term implications. So no, thank you. This is amazing to have this discussion and the discourse. Thank you very much. So with that, I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to go ahead and proceed. And so the next focus unit that I really want to introduce is it's very timely. TAF environment became one of the main, hotly debated discussions. We started speaking about issues around climate change, for example, and why that is our responsibility when Africa isn't the largest contributor towards climate change. And so I'm going to just highlight some of what we identified as priorities under TAF environment, where we are focusing on our abundant natural world as an African continent, and how it can be affected by human activity, with an emphasis on protecting and also providing equitable exploitation of our indigenous resources for productive sustainability. So that is really the description of the focus unit. I'm going to share with you just really briefly some of the priority policies that we identified. So one of the first topics was really around renewable energy and decentralizing our energy sources. And so what this speaks to is really getting ourselves off that main grid and ensuring that we focus on alternative energy sources and decentralize how we harness our energy and how we access energy as African people. And so if you look at the numbers, really currently there's 75% of the 2.6 billion people on the continent who lack access to clean fuel and any sort of technology on the continent. And yet we've got an abundant potential in terms of green energy and the ability to generate our own power as a continent. You'll also find that on the continent, we're looking again at external solutions and asking others to come and help us fix our problems when it comes to access to power. So as the African Federation, we want to pave the way for the upgrade of and the expansion of energy infrastructure to support the integration of renewable energy into the grid, and then emphasizing really smart grids and energy storage systems and systems for the transmission of energy to accommodate decentralization and ensure that even in the most rural of areas, our citizens will have access to power and be able to access information technology as well, so that everybody progresses. So that is one of the core focuses, is looking at decentralizing energy and harnessing the potential. And again, this ties into TAF economy, because there will be the need to develop enterprises and industry around energy generation. But Patrick touched on another very important aspect, and that's biodiversity and climate change. And despite us being endowed with all of these incredible, forests and agricultural lands and water bodies, and the ecosystems that we have, we're not really looking at them as valuable, or we're not placing value in the biodiversity that we have. And I say this because as a continent, we are experiencing a tremendous decline in biodiversity, and that's due to the rapid urbanization of our populations, the increase in these big urban cities, but also, I think, the lack of knowledge and information and understanding of the value of biodiversity. And so climate change is, in fact, becoming, a leading driver of biodiversity loss, even on our continent. So we are affected. And so in the next 50 to 100 years, this will become a very important aspect. And these negative impacts are going to be something we need to look at and examine and understand as a continent. So we'll seek to promote, nature-based solutions, and we will find ways to collaborate with those who have ideas for progressing the continent in terms of its biodiversity and the agenda around environment. We're also looking at the natural resource exploitation that's going on across the continent, and what the impact is on the environment in terms of CO2 emissions, which are now fast growing. We are experiencing increased industrialization in some ways, particularly with fossil fuels, and these all have an impact on the environment. So we need a multifaceted strategy. We're not saying that we shouldn't exploit our natural resources, but let's make sure that they're creating jobs for African people. There need to be, resource extraction agreements that prioritize the interests of our people, and I'll leave it at that. And then in terms of pollution, chemical waste, looking at the amount of plastic that is growing on our continent and the impact that it'll have due to increased populations on our continent, the increased urbanization of our continent. What are we going to do, in terms of managing that process? Oftentimes, the plastics are thrown into, water bodies, or they become part of our own food chain, which affects our health as African people, and will have an impact in terms of cancer risk. So toxins, pollutants, all of these things are part of what we need to address, and we need to be thinking about them now, not when it's already too late. Fresh water and sanitation is another major issue. We have a huge number of African people living on this continent, and they don't even have access to water, to clean and safe water. And so what are we going to do to solve that problem? We need to address this, and we need really to construct and maintain water supply systems. And this goes again back to infrastructure. There's the intersection there. Sewage treatment systems. You look at some of the countries that have higher and higher populations, like Nigeria, for example. There are people living in highly unsanitary environments. How do we protect them from that? And how do we make sure that everyone has access to clean water? And it can start with simple things like educating society on safe, practices, hand wash systems, and that sort of thing. But we need to get a little bit more sophisticated as well. We also need to look at the displacement of indigenous people due to population growth, but also due to exploitation. And in the future, will we have enough land as our populations grow? So there's a lot that we've been doing in terms of early research on that. And then taking mitigating measures to make sure that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, the youth will look at the work we've done today as the African Federation in terms of mitigating environmental challenges and making sure that we have a truly sustainable, multifaceted approach that also supports economic development and that considers the socioeconomic conditions of our citizens. So I'm going to pause and open up the floor again to just give you a chance to share your views as well with regards to this focus unit. As you can see, it's a really important one, and it does cross-connect with with most of the two that we've already covered. Armel, please go ahead. And Armel, welcome to this session, the Speaker of the Assembly for the African Federation. So happy to see you.
Thank you, Elisabeth. I'm Armel, as introduced, from Cameroon. The issue of climate change is particularly sensitive to me. I remember the last time that we were talking about this, I did well to highlight the fact that Africa emits less than 4% of the global emissions. So I always felt like it's not necessarily our priority to solve in quotes climate change and the emissions of other continents, because climate change is a whole thing, and it's going to take a lot of coordination, not only from Africa but other continents who are not necessarily willing to reduce the emissions or who wants to cheat on their carbon footprints that they announce and all. So it's something that's really, really difficult for the African Federation. Practically, we can do what we can for the continent, like reducing or doing what is good for our continent, reducing our plastic consumption and all that. But necessarily, the effects of climate change affect us, whether we emit or not, or whether we contribute majorly or not. It does affect. I think in our various countries in Africa, we can actually notice climate degradation. In my country, it's still raining severely in December, and that's like the first time I'm seeing it in my whole life. So it's a really complicated thing. People who are used to common people who are used to working their farms for the dry season at this time have to wait. People who have businesses that need the dry season to prosper have to wait, and economically is not necessarily viable, and people aren't used to it. So it brings like a whole lot of change to the continent. But there's things that we can do to solve it globally. But it doesn't mean that Africa shouldn't do their part, and specifically the African Federation shouldn't do what they have to do to help Africans. I think some programs, some education programs, more education programs on climate change and climate action are going to be necessary, because I myself have to take my certification out of the continent because there aren't many structures here focusing on that. But I think we should, even if it's just for awareness, we should make people, or we should have organs that make people aware of the dangers of climate change and how we can do to counter on the little and basic level. So that's a contribution I'm willing to add, just to stay on the same role. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Most appreciated. And again, I know a lot of the discussion, you really paved the way through the early conversations around this particular focus unit. So thank you for always making us aware. Anyone else on? Oh, I do see Esther, you do have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. This is Elisabeth from Uganda. Yeah, climate. When we talk about climate, basically in Uganda and Africa, we have not to forget. We need, as TAF, we need mindset change. As Africans need to see something that is tangible, the tangible initiatives that are going to come in place, those that are going to change the cultural practices. Most people grew up knowing, like, I use firewood and this. So when you bring up right now, what we need to do is education organs. Just like as Amela said, we need to come up with the things right from the grassroots. If we need Africans to be involved in the environmental sustainability, the East African communities or Africa at large have to come together to work up a policy or a roadmap to see that Africa's environment or climate, which is a very, very urgent issue, has to be put in place, and not forgetting raising voices for the Western communities or for the Western parts of the globe that have influence on how they are damaging the African environment, with Africans quiet under ignorance, not knowing what to do, having to say things undercover, not having a platform to raise their voices because they believe they have been put, as we have said with with TAF narrative, they have been made to believe that they are inferior. So we need as TAF to bring up a policy or to bring a platform that is going to help Africans gain the confidence. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution. You raised quite a few very important points. Patrick, please go ahead. I see your hand.
Yeah, I just want to again chip in and say something little about climate, and I think this is important so that when we finally write it down, we don't miss very important elements of it. the science from IPCC on climate is saying that the CO2, which is already in the atmosphere, will be there for another 1,000 years. So I want Africans to know that if that CO2, if we are using nature-based solutions to remove it, it will take us not less than 1,000 years to 8,000 years. It means that it doesn't matter that we are contributing little. It matters that the CO2 is in the atmosphere. And if you look at the global division of labor, 4/5 of the world's population lives in Africa. So the people who create the problem are only 1/5 of the world's population in the north, but the people they impact are the majority. First, who are vulnerable, have no voice, as you're saying, are poor. With all those statistics, then it means that whatever they do out there, we stand to be hurt the most. And so I think we can't sit there and think that the problem is elsewhere, and that we can escape planning and looking for political options to deal with this issue, because we are the majority and we are the most impacted because of our vulnerabilities, and the problem is being created by a very small population in the world. So I just want that narrative not to be lost, so that we don't rest on our laurels, thinking that the problem is elsewhere.
Thank you very much for those very wise words, and for helping to really drive forward the reality of what we are facing. Joshua, please go ahead. I see your hand.
Thank you, Elisabeth. Greetings to you all. I'm Katebe Joshua in Uganda and head of TAF Environment. My question, maybe let's start with here in Uganda, as we grew up, we used to define environment as man and his surroundings. And here we have had people talking about the flora and fauna, the unoccupied land. As we mind about unoccupied land to be used under use, we have to also look at how we guard against the extinction of African strong forests, wild animals. We have birds which are in extinction, all those things. So we have to put them into our consideration. And then, Elisabeth, I would like to hear from you. For example, here in Uganda, we are in the process of extracting our first crude oil. It has the longest pipeline from Uganda to Tanzania at the coast. It has escalated conversations here and there. It's good to let Africa extract its minerals, but again, we have to mind about environmental conservation and climate change, all those things. So I would like to hear from you how as TAF can go about that. Thank you.
Really appreciate your contribution, and happy that we have representation in TAF Environment in Uganda. Look, I'm not going to be presenting the solutions in terms of what TAF is going to do, because we need to go through the process of having debates around each and every one of these priority policies in the focus units. But certainly we want to ensure that as we are working through the development of our continent, whether it's the exploitation of our oil, the mineral wealth of our continent, we are also considering the environmental implications. And I think some of the previous speakers were very clear about some of the implications of what comes about, through not looking at the the long-term impact that we will have on the environment. So I'm not ever going to, as CEO of the African Federation, impose a solution. What I would like to see over the coming months, weeks, is us having more forums like this where we actually refine our plans and our solutions. And that's why I keep saying we're going to come up with thought leadership. we're going to address how can we, enrich and we all say through the African Federation, we want to see prosperity, but at the same time, make sure we're not, harming this continent for future generations. So let's work together. Let's make sure that the content that we are developing is very clear, that our position is very clear, but that will come from us collectively. We want to make sure this is an inclusive process. I am not dodging your question, but I will say that certainly we want to protect the environment and make sure that as we are exploiting, we are not exploiting it for the benefit of foreign nations. We are exploiting our resources to uplift our communities, but in a sustainable manner. I do see another hand from JD Mpofu. Please go ahead with your comment or question.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Dekeledi Mpofu-Foisier. So I live and work in France right now, and apologies that I joined the call not very long ago. I'm really excited about TAF. So I wanted to join because I wanted to know more about the work you're doing. For me, I'll just present a little bit about myself. So I am a project coordinator for the OECD, if some of you may know of it. The OECD is a standard setter and a convener for best practice sharing among countries. I am both South African and Zimbabwean, and I am a Pan Africanist in the core, and when I saw the information on TAF, I really immediately jumped and said I really want to see what you are doing, and in my view, we are the only people who can actually, as Africans, we will be able to see what we can do to make the changes for our own continent. And I particularly like the Pan-African integration approach. And just hearing the voices just now from Amel, from Esther, from Patrick, and I believe Josh, I think that it is really important that TAF is a catalytic force in developing this not only philosophical viewpoints, but also really looking at how we can advocate on all those issues that will ensure that there is a prosperous and sustainable development in Africa, and mostly seeing how we can join forces with other organizations that are doing other similar work around the globe, and around the globe and in Africa, because I believe that there are allies out there. And for today, I'll just be an observer because I haven't heard much. But in my strength, I think is really on seeing how this platform can be a convener for other similar organizations and other actors out there to join forces in order to make strong advocacy on the issues that we all have in mind. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for your comments and for joining us today, Jocelyn. It was so wonderful to hear. First of all, some of the work you're doing, but also, how your first response and reaction to the formation of the African Federation. And we do look forward to having a conversation with you and seeing how you can play a role as well in getting involved with this amazing work that we're doing. So thank you so much. And it's okay you missed the beginning. We are recording this session, so we'll make sure you get a copy of the video after the fact. So thank you. Now, I do see another hand, and I'm not going to be able to take it. I apologize. Please don't throw eggs at me. I just need to make sure that we move on, because we are already approaching the end of the session, and I want to respect your Saturday and give you a chance to get back to your families. So if you'll just forgive me, I'm going to press on, and then I will see, I'll keep opening the forum so that we can continue to contribute. This has been so incredibly, insightful. So if I may, I'd like to move on to speaking about the next focus unit, and another very important one. Again, we have 5, and a lot of thought was given towards trying to ensure we had a very balanced, outlook in terms of the approach to solving and addressing the problems of the African continent. And so TAF Wellness is really our 4th focus unit. And this is where we are looking at our systems of healthcare and education on the continent, looking at, what we can do to emphasize proactive, multi-dimensional approaches and the provision of basic services for the people of Africa, and for informed choices and flourishing lifestyles. And so that is really the overarching description of TAF Wellness. But as I mentioned, we've got a lot of work done already on each of the focus units. And so I will call up sort of the summary on TAF Wellness and what we are looking to address as part of this particular focus unit. And the main priority policies really we're looking at how we are going to we call it healing the brain drain, or reversing the brain drain, the migration of skilled health workers from Africa to wealthier countries is having a major impact on our continent. It's really becoming a trend across the continent itself, and you're even finding African governments advocating for the export of our health workers or our health professionals, and yet we don't have a balanced representation of doctor to patient ratios, or I read some statistics recently about mental health. We don't have enough medical practitioners to address these various, health issues that are affecting the continent. And so we need to talk about what we can do to reverse this and to really create an environment where African health professionals can stay on the continent. And there are many aspects to that, even if you think about other elements, and I'll talk about them in a moment, about how we are supporting and training and developing the health sector and the professionals behind it. We need to spend a lot of time also thinking about how we are going to prevent diseases and really improve the wellness of our populations. African people are dying at incredible rates for reasons that could be prevented, and some of these are as simple as children playing in garbage, our sewer system's not working properly. We have a scenario where, we have, just contaminated spaces, and these are killing our citizens. I know that, more recently, there are unexplained deaths across the continent, and we've come to accept that there are always going to be funerals, in our families. Our friends are going to die, and it's something we are accepting of, and it's very painful to watch. As a person who has studied public health, I have a master's in public health. I have great concern about health. And initially my concerns were, particular diseases, but it turns out it's the most basic things, sanitation, education, teaching our populations about cost-effective ways to intervene and to improve their health. So we need to look at this and really look at it very deeply. And it starts at childhood. It could be early education all the way through to individuals who are mature within our communities. We have a major issue on our continent around substance abuse, mental health, and the statistics are shocking in terms of the number of people who have mental health conditions in our continent. And so we need to study this and understand and analyze the root causes of this. But any sort of hazardous use of, psychoactive substances illicit drugs, even alcohol. And I think in many of our African countries, we just accept that a lot of people drink a lot, but it's actually alcoholism, and we need to come to terms with that. And what is the impact on the long-term health of our populations? So the impact and the burden, some of these substance abuses are becoming even of graver concern. We've got cocaine, across many of our African countries, drugs, hard drugs that are coming into households, even to children, heroin abuse, and these are really triggering a lot of mental health challenges. So we need to work hard to stop this and to prevent the expansion of it. We also are saying, as the African Federation, we want to ensure we have health sovereignty. We have a weak health infrastructural system. When it came time and COVID, the pandemic spread to our continent, we waited for the West to bring us medicines. We waited for the West to tell us how we were going to solve our problems. Few people were looking, yes, at natural indigenous remedies, but we were waiting for the West to bring us drugs. We were waiting for the East to bring us, our vaccines. Let's not have a scenario like that. We want to produce, and even on this platform, we have biochemists and scientists today who are able to contribute towards the development of our infrastructure, our innovation around health sovereignty. So let's look at these solutions as African people, not looking at other countries and looking at adopting their systems. Let's find homegrown, innovative solutions for health sovereignty on our continent. And so I'll stop there because there's a lot we can cover under health wellness. And I will remind you again that this is not a comprehensive list. We will be reviewing what we're calling our priority policies periodically, and trying to make sure that we're constantly staying aware of what is pressing, what is important for us to address. But if there are any contributions from the floor, I'll open up for a couple of minutes. Thank you. Jocelyn, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Elisabeth. That is well said, and I agree completely with what you have just outlined. My first reaction there would just be to say there is perhaps a need to look closely at R&D and maybe do some kind of futuring exercise where we want to kind of see the Africa we want and map out the road to how we get there. But that was just what I was thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you're right. It starts with the investment in our academic institutions. We need to be developing our own intellectual property, but we need to make sure that that is a priority. And so I know there were agreements made by governments that they would prioritize at the Abuja conference, that they would prioritize 15% of the budgets, the national budgets towards healthcare. We're not seeing that across the continent. So as a collective, as we grow in terms of our strength as the African Federation, we're hoping that we can come with viable solutions for some of these challenges. And is that Edward? I see your hand, I think. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. This is very, very wonderful. It's a long way to achieving our goal, but step by step we'll cover a mile. I'm happy that we should also explore local technologies on how best can we move forward with issues to do with TAF wellness as our area of focus. Yeah, I know you were busy. I was listening when you were discussing issues to do with climate change. Climate change, they have adopted local technologies. That which our parents used to use in the past, that was somehow at least maybe discarded. So in the health system also, we should also adopt these things, because even the West and the East countries, we inclined all, we were trusting much on them when they are providing their medicine and whatever. They came to Africa, they explored our medicine, they took them away and started producing the medicine, start selling to us. So these are some of the issues whereby we need also to sit down and see how best can we provide for ourselves in terms of advancing our local technologies that are always positive towards our health and wellness. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your contribution, and most definitely that encompasses everything from looking at our own indigenous knowledge, because we do have our own health remedies, and looking at more broadly what the priorities should be in terms of addressing the needs. I'm not going to be commenting on all of the chats. I'm sorry, I am following, but I do want to point out that most of these solutions are going to be context specific. Patrick, I saw your comment, and you're absolutely right. It's all going to really come into play around our context, what it is that we're facing as a challenge, and what priorities need to be put forward. And yes, I do see, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting who is behind Kule, the profile, but you said you've reminded me, Elisabeth, about the Abuja Declaration. Yes, and that is an important one. We really had said that we were going to make that pledge, and we have not done so. Let's please try to get to the 5th focus unit. We're so excited to say is the focus unit that will be actually soft launching first. And as you heard from earlier, from some of the remarks that were made, we have on this forum the CEO of TAF Narrative, which is a 5th focus unit for the African Federation. It's the focus unit that will really be looking at our history, our culture, and our potential, but with an emphasis on African people, amplifying our story and the purposefulness of communication from an African perspective. So for a stronger Pan-African mentality, and someone mentioned, our mindset, and really addressing, some of these issues will be addressed through mindset and mentality, but also creating a clearer identity for African people and clearer objectives for us as a continent. And so I'd like to just highlight a couple, just very high level, the priority policies that were outlined as we were going through the exercise for the TAF narrative. And again, this is the first focus unit. So some of you were talking about TAF economy being incredibly important. We have been driving forward all 5 of these focus units in different ways, partly through research, through some of the early work we've been doing in shaping our priority policies for each of these focus units, but they're not launched officially. And the first soft launch of the TAF narrative will be coming soon. So we are talking about a range of issues under TAF narrative. For example, bridge building is one of the focus topics, really looking at how we will be creating and developing relationships, or establishing inside and outside of TAF those linkages, or those and I think, Jocelyn, you articulated it so well earlier, but really there are allies, there are people that we can work with to further the work that we want to do, and also being able to really position ourselves well, to strengthen ourselves through bridge building. We talked a lot with TAF narrative about teaching our children, because really at the core of the African Federation, we are doing this for future generations. Our mission, our vision is for 50 years from now, 100 years from now, making sure the continent remains sound and becomes the superpower or the prosperous continent that it should be. So we want to make sure we're teaching our children, whether they live on the continent or they live abroad, that they are African and what it means to be African. And so we've talked a lot about what that could look like, whether it's, the culture, but deeper than that, understanding our history, understanding the science behind, some of what was achieved on the continent and what can be achieved still today. And then also promoting, thinking skills, problem-solving skills, in our children, ensuring that they have digital literacy. Some of the children in remote areas are almost forgotten. They don't have access to information. They are probably inventors all across this continent who are not ever going to be realized. So let's open up opportunities and avenues for them. And so let's make sure that children of this continent are taught. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the consciousness of our mindset as Africans, but we have really a lot of work to do in terms of reversing the negative mentality that has now permeated across our continent. We as African people need to realize that potential is all around us. We have the capacity, we have the talent. It's within us to move our continent forward, and it really starts with the consciousness of the African people. So through TAF Narrative, you have a tall order CEO, Benjamin, to really work on advancing us and really restoring that confidence, in what it means to be African. We want to also work on unveiling the heritage of our continent, rediscovering our diversity, our strength. There were kingdoms on our continent even before we were colonized by the West. So what does that mean, in terms of identifying and understanding our language, our, the origins of who we are, our culture, but also breaking the chains of imposed oppression. We call it exploitation and imposed foreign ideologies. So when you think about a lot of the messaging that comes to us as African people, let's be conscious of these issues and how some of the messaging is designed to really contain us as African people from developing. And so let's look at ways to counter that. And that starts with owning our own media, having our own, voices heard, developing our own narrative, expanding the ability for us to channel information from Africans to Africans wherever we are. And remember, many of us are not even living on the continent of Africa anymore. So I'm going to pause again and just stop with those brief remarks with regards to TAF Narrative. I do believe in some ways that every one of these focus units is incredibly important, and every one of them has an incredible and vital role to play in the future of our continent. And it is almost as if it was, destiny for us to have designed the focus units to be so balanced and also critical and so important. And each of you come to this platform with different interests. Patrick, I already know you're an environmentalist, and we share that. But at the same time, you might have an interest in other focus units, as I do. And so we, as members of the African Federation, I'll talk a little bit in a moment about how we will interact with these focus units and how they play such a vital role in really the development of the work that we need to do collectively as part of the African Federation. I'm going to pause very briefly on this one because I know there'll be a lot of work done around the TAF narrative, so I'm not going to take a lot of questions, but I am going to open up the floor just so we can have some initial responses. I'm sure Benjamin and everyone else involved with TAF narrative will be very keen to hear your responses. I see your point about Paul is not speaking up. I know we are used to on almost every platform him making a lot of the contributions. And I think just the way that we designed today's program, I do want to introduce Paul Reynolds, a very important member of the executive of the African Federation. He heads up our support units and is helping us with a lot of the policy work and the framework within which we operate as the African Federation. I think you can see all the applause. A very valued member. I couldn't even imagine what I would be doing today as part of the African Federation without him. Oh my goodness, I'll put my heart there too, Paul. You are surprisingly quiet today. Thank you, everyone, for acknowledging the great work that Paul has done and his team. This is what it's all about, right? Us working together to move our continent forward, and everyone has a vital role to play. And Jocelyn, I do see your hand. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Elisabeth. I just wanted to say that, yes, I'd love to see in what ways I can contribute to the narrative, because I already have a few organizations in mind that I know for sure are doing the similar work for that. And I was about to ask about, where does education fall in place? And you neatly responded to that. I think it's a part of the educational component is definitely included in the narrative focus, I believe, because I was thinking I didn't hear the other four, but in my mind I was wondering where you were fitting in the educational part. I mean, you can fit in education and awareness campaigns in any of the pillars that you're working with, but I think that the narrative part is really the space where you can really look at reaching at different communication channels and reaching out to people and working with how you could work with youth in challenging the views that they have about themselves and about the others, and actually just I really like the idea of building soft skills, building hard skills, and just really building the full potential of the individual in all aspects of the individual, and in doing this, changing the narrative that the others have on Africa, but also what Africans have on ourselves. So I'm just really excited about that, and I'd be happy to get in contact with those people who are currently working on the narrative pillar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will certainly bring you on board as part of the ongoing discussions. Thank you so much again. Looking forward to working with you. Patrick, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I was in the narrative unit, and I must also congratulate Benjamin for coordinating that work, perfectly, well. And we said some very interesting things. I'm glad that we all acknowledge that narratives is the place, because I think if it doesn't happen there, it will be very difficult for it to happen elsewhere. But I just wanted to add that, of course, we have arts and culture, which is one of the strongest legs of narrative, and I think we really need a revival of our arts and culture, and we need to sort of tone down the pop culture, the American celebrity culture that's really attacked our young population in ways that reversing can be very difficult. And we really also have to think about media really strongly, because we do need to do something about our own media, community media, and the sort of narratives that they push, because the overall Hollywood narrative has destroyed Africa immensely. And so it will be critical, and I don't know how we're going to work with government to really deal with curriculums, because it is these education curriculums that sort of embed the narratives that we have. And the adult population those are already spoiled goods, but at least we need to do some work the generation that is coming after us. So those are discussions that we had, and I think we can strengthen them and really make this narrative beat the flagship and the most important thing in the TAF. I just wanted to make that point. But thanks to Benjamin and the colleagues, the debates have been very stimulating.
And it just again shows just what a great team we have as part of the African Federation. We all are a very vital part of really the shaping of this great organization, and that is why TAF is needed. Of course, having looked at the challenges and the issues that we're facing as Africans, we really need to answer the question of how are we going to tackle these challenges. And so Mr. Abuchi Okari is with us. He's the head of chapters for the African Federation. And Abuchi, could you please give us just a glimpse of the structure of the organization of the African Federation for those who are with us maybe for the first time, but just also as a refresher in terms of what the structure of the African Federation looks like? Thank you.
All right. Good evening. Thank you, Elisabeth, and good evening, everyone. It's really great to be here. regarding this important discussion on why TAF is needed. Okay, we are structured, as a single entity, and we will operate across all the African countries through the 5 focus units. Those focus units, Elisabeth has already extensively described all of them, so I won't be going into those. Yeah, and we also ensure that we launch TAF across all the countries in Africa. We would have chapter governance, which would include the assembly, the cabinet, the executive committee, and of course the focus unit organizations. I am proud, as Elisabeth has informed us, I'm proud to be leading the teams that are currently forming the various country chapters, such as Uganda, Kenya, and 2 to 3 other chapters, which we are expecting to launch first quarter of 2024. Then, as far as governance is concerned, TAF will be governed by a charter which would prescribe an assembly and cabinet, okay? And the cabinet would delegate the management of the organization to the executive committee at the central level and the country levels to develop and resource TAF strategic plans and deliver our vision, our mission, our purpose, the promise for the continent of Africa. I should also add that TAF as an organization is currently at pre-launch phase. Okay, so we are looking at working hard to put all the round pegs in the round holes and square pegs in the square holes, trying to build these chapters within each countries and get them to the point where they are, able to soft launch, by the first quarter of 2024. So that's a brief update on the structure of how TAF intends to operate. Back at you, Elisabeth.
I wanted to appreciate, Mr. Okari, Abuchi. Thank you very much for all of the great work that you've been doing as well on the TAF chapters. So turning over and looking at the roadmap, I would say that, and I always say, we must face the reality that restoring the sovereignty of Africa is not going to be an easy road. It'll be a marathon, with really an uphill obstacle course. I've used that analogy so many times, rather than a short downhill sprint. And the reason I say that is because this has been attempted many times before. And many of you are here today and have already left an indelible mark, perhaps through other efforts that you've had as Pan-Africans, or already through the African Federation. You've made an impact, you've made a difference on this planet by conscientizing individuals, families, Africans on this planet. As our small band who chose to begin to walk together, as part of the African Federation. So future generations of Africans will be completely indebted to you for your sacrifices. And I hope that you understand the impact of the work you're doing. I don't take it lightly. So talking of the roadmap and where we're headed, the African Federation's executive has assessed the work that needs to be done, and we are ready to fully launch the organization. And I'll talk about the timelines and some of the other deliverables. But when we hard launch, we want to be able to project a compelling proposition, both internally and externally. And we want to ensure that we are solidly established and wholly united internally as an organization. So our target for hard launch is by the end of 2024. We have set a target date or timeline for that, but there's a lot that we need to do building up to the hard launch. And so between now and the hard launch, we expect to really focus in on external communications and engagement. And that has already begun this month. We want to make sure that we are, streamlining our central communications channel. or the team that's leading central communications. We also, through TAF chapters, are going to begin to soft launch. And then our long-term strategy will also be completed. We've been drafting it, and we should have that completed this month. Focus units, as we've said, we will start to celebrate the soft launch of focus units as early as January 2024. And that's starting with the soft launch led by the CEO, Benjamin, and that will be of TAF Narrative. Then we will also be working on establishing the TAF cabinet, which will be appointed in April of 2024 prior to the hard launch of the organization. The African Federation also has an assembly, and we are looking for the assembly to approve the plans for the hard launch by June of 2024. And so to complement the work of TAF and the focus units and the chapters, a central communications team has been established, and that was actually established in the month of November, and is creating and working on an engagement plan for the rollout and the progression in all of these areas. So the work ahead is not going to be possible without the dedicated leadership teams that we have, and many of you even represented today. The work that you're doing, will have a growing impact for us across the entire globe, because as we start to formalize, we will be opening up registrations for individuals not only on the continent, but also Africans who are living abroad or descendants of African countries. And I'd like to thank all of you for the involvement, the dedication, the hard work. And I say I, but really we would like to thank you as the executives, but also as all of the leadership of the African Federation. I want to emphasize a very subtle point, and that is that while international community and partnerships will support and strengthen the collaboration of the work we're going to do, it will always be crucial for us as Africans to recognize the responsibility that we have for Africa's future. And we've talked about this a little bit, but ultimately the responsibility rests with us, the African people. No one's coming to save us. And this really underscores the imperative for us as Africans to harness our inherent strengths, to collectively pool our resources to address internal challenges and forge innovative solutions that really align with the continent's distinct aspirations as we've defined them, and as we'll continue to define them. And the journey towards progress really is going to require unity. It's going to require effective governance. It's going to require a steadfast commitment to realizing Africa's vast potential, but on our own terms. And I say that with a lot of excitement, because for the first time, it will be on our own terms. So as the majority demographic, I must also mention that the importance is involving the youth, because they are the majority demographic for our continent, this young population of Africans who represent the greatest potential. We must put them at the forefront. We must involve them. We must include them. We must engage them. And we have to do so in terms of innovation, creativity. We need to tap into their untapped talent. We need to invest in education. I know you've already said that, in skills development, in access, and giving them opportunities. It's paramount that they be given the opportunity to progress this nation, and that is not only to empower them as individuals, but also to enable them to be part of fueling the socio-economic progress of our continent. I think we've had quite a lot of discussion at this point, but I'd like to take a few minutes to turn the floor back over to the CEO of TAF Narrative. Please go ahead and take the floor.
Fellow Pan-Africanists, thank you for engaging in today's discussion on the critical topic of why is TAF needed. As we conclude today's presentation, let's take a moment to reflect on the key points that have been emphasized. We began by acknowledging the long overdue need for inter-African cooperation and Pan-Africanism, the historical context of Pan-Africanism, reminding us of the visionary leaders who sought unity in the face of colonization and oppression. Today, our continent still grapples with economic, political, and social challenges, necessitating a united effort. Elisabeth Valerio, the CEO of the African Federation. She shed light on the imperative for a new Pan-African organization. She articulated the vision of the African Federation as a catalyst for change, addressing economic disparities, political instability, and fostering social development. The lessons learned from the past Pan-African initiatives underscore the need for a more robust and adaptable framework, leading to the establishment of the African Federation. We then delved into the potential benefits of the increased collaboration among African nations, highlighting economic stability and growth, amplified global influence, and enriched social and cultural exchange. The focus units within TAF were presented as key drivers for change, addressing governance, the economy, the environment, wellness, and of course, TAF narrative. Abuchi Okari, our global head of TAF chapters, provided insights into the structure and organization of TAF, emphasizing the global entity with the central leadership, focus units, and country chapters. The establishment of country chapters will ensure the effective implementation of TAF's vision at the local level, allowing for a more localized and responsive approach to the diverse needs of African nations. Finally, we outlined a roadmap and timelines for TAF's journey ahead, with a target hard launch by the end of 2024. External communications and engagement, the soft launch of chapters and focus units, and the appointment of TAF's cabinet, key milestones to look forward over the coming months. As we wrap up today's session, I want to express gratitude to each participant for their valuable contributions today. The commitment to Pan-Africanism and shared vision for a prosperous continent have been evident in our discussion. Your presence today signifies the beginning of a series of activities that will shape the future of Africa. I encourage each participant to stay actively involved going forward, providing ongoing collaboration. This presentation is not a conclusion, but the commencement of the journey towards a stronger, more united Africa. I encourage you to continue to share ideas and follow updates on our website at theafricanfederation.org. You will also be able to register your interest in TAF on our website soon. In closing, let me echo the words of Elisabeth Valerio. The responsibility for Africa's future rests with us, the African people. Together, let's forge ahead with unity, effective governance, and a steadfast commitment to realizing Africa's vast potential on our own terms. Thank you once again for your participation. I do believe we clearly answered the question, why is TAF needed? And we look forward to the continued success of the African Federation. The journey ahead may be challenging, but with our collective efforts, we can build a brighter and more prosperous future for all of Africa. Have a good evening.